A civil rights group has filed a complaint over the search of a Muslim passenger boarding a flight from Logan Airport. The search by federal agents took place in May. The complaint is only the latest in a series of legal challenges over federal searches and watch lists. Our guest is the attorney for the complaint, the civil rights director from the Council on American-Islamic Relations in Massachusetts, Barbara Dougan. Thank you very much for being with us, Barbara.
My pleasure.
This complaint that you're talking about in May and another one in March, they both involved women. And one thing I didn't get into was how invasive these searches were. So what exactly happened?
Well, we don't represent the woman who had trouble in March. That's the ACLU's complaint. I mean, I know the basics of that. What I do know in detail is what happened to my client. She went through the usual screening. You know, you go through the metal detector and everything, and was pulled out. She wears, I should say, a long dress and a hijab, and was pulled out and wanded. I think there's a couple different kinds of wands that are used depending on what they're searching for. And she describes the woman who pulled her aside for this additional screening as surly towards her from the very start. And she wanded her, and she then crouched down and inserted whichever wand she was holding. She couldn't tell, as she stood like this, as she was directed, and pushed it up underneath her dress so far up that it made contact through her leggings and underwear with her genitals.
And how has she felt about this?
Well, at the time, she was simply sort of shocked by what had happened. And then as, you know, the days went on, it's just really hit her what had happened. This was done publicly. One of the things we note in our complaint is that the TSA agent or employee offered to do this in a private area, the wanding. And my client declined because she said, first of all, she wanted other passengers to see that there's nothing to fear from a Muslim passenger on their flight. But she also wasn't expecting anything like this. So she had difficulty even explaining to me, another woman, what had happened to her. She was utterly mortified. And this has continually affected her and whether she's even willing to travel. So she was humiliated, mortified, and especially in terms of, you know, modesty issues for Muslim women.
Any woman.
For any woman,
right,
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we always say. How would you feel if this were you, if this was your mother, or your wife, or your daughter? I mean, it would be terrible for anyone. At the same time that this happened to her, she describes the folks that, you know, how your bags go through on the conveyor belt, going through every single item in her suitcase, pulling everything out, looking at it. And she says that the woman who had already, you know, for lack of a better term, assaulted her with the wand, going back and forth with the employees at the conveyor belt and getting increasingly agitated. She said it seemed like they were trying to find something and were getting agitated that they couldn't. The agent who originally had assaulted her wanted her down several more times. To what end? Who can say? But so this was the context of that one action is in this larger context of a very aggressive, hostile search of a woman who presented no threat. No, you know, there's no red flags there except that she is Muslim, visibly Muslim, and then was rather, you know, they were annoyed and sent her on her way.
No, I mean, you would totally rule out that something strange came up on a scan, or maybe there was some sort of indicator about financial transactions in her history. Could any of that explain what happened?
To the best of our knowledge, she's not on any of the federal watch lists. At least she wasn't at the time. Who knows now that she's filed a complaint. But I had asked her the different you know, you're never told you're on a list. You just kind of look at what's happening and put two and two together. We didn't see any of the factors that you would expect to see if someone was on some sort of watch list.
Now, you indicated that she was wearing a traditional head cover, so I guess obviously a lot of people would conclude that she's Muslim, but
Yes.
do we know this is the sort of thing that happens more to Muslims or people of color than it does to other people? I mean, are there any numbers out there about this?
Well, the problem is the watch list is, what she's not, as far as we know, a watch list case, but this is all secret. This is all secret. What we have is the stories of the people who come to us. Muslims come to CARE, whether people in general, people of color in general, you'd have to ask, it'd be great to talk to the NAACP or another group about what they see. But we hear so frequently Muslim travelers being told that they're being pulled out of line randomly. But random would not mean it happens to you every single time you travel. Random would not mean that when you're returning to the country, you each time have interrogations and delays that can last up 2 to 3 hours. Random would not mean that you're placed, when you cross the border from Canada, in a holding cell and perhaps even handcuffed to a bar or something. I mean, that's not how random events happen, I don't think.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Barbara Dougan from the Council on American-Islamic Relations-Massachusetts. Barbara, in this particular complaint, what kind of relief are you looking for?
Well, we're asking the TSA to investigate it. If I were TSA, I would want to go back and view those tapes to see what happened. Because if there's a TSA employee who's doing something, I mean, my understanding from how other people's searches go, I mean, I'm not subjected to that, is that they don't go up underneath a dress. So if that was inappropriate, that needs to be dealt with. The more worrisome question is whether, judging by the demeanor and aggressiveness towards my client, that in fact this is not a rogue employee, but somebody who's following the policy at Logan Airport.
And TSA, from what I read in the Globe, says that there was nothing improper about this search at all.
They had not yet seen our search, our complaint. I think they might have been talking about the one in March.
Back in March of the Harvard graduate
yes,
student. Right,
yes.
Right. Now, another concern you have is with watch lists. A watch list, if you're on it, doesn't mean you cannot fly, but I guess it means that things work differently. How do they work?
Yeah, there's different watch lists. There is a no-fly list. You tend to find out about that after you've left the country and can't come back home. But the more common one is kind of the general watch list, and nobody really knows, how it works because it's all secret. There's no accountability at all. What we know at this point from discovery that's been done in other lawsuits and some reports that have been either released or leaked is that there's now over 1 million names on that list. And what it's supposed to mean is that you are known or suspected of terrorist activity. I mean, that's a pretty incredibly serious and dangerous listing to have, or label attached to you. Yet what we also know is babies are on that list, children, many people who believe they only can guess at it, that their name is similar to somebody in who knows what country, whose name is spelled somewhat similarly, or they are friends or relatives or business associates of someone on the list, even assuming the person was on the list legitimately. But there's what good is a list with over 1 million names where there seems to be very little logical evidence for someone getting on that list. There's all different ways people are clearly getting on the list that aren't appropriate, but when you're on because your cousin knows somebody who knows somebody, I think most people would agree that does nothing to enhance safety.
I imagine the government might say, if you ask us to be more forthcoming about what puts a person on the list and be more public about that, wouldn't more people just game the system in some way?
I'm not sure how you do that because you don't even know how you got on the list. I mean, a host of federal agencies can do what's called nominating someone to the list. But at this point, there doesn't seem to be any measures taken to ensure that that information is either accurate or even remotely relevant to the issue of, I mean, again, that's a pretty damning and dangerous label to be attached, that you are a known or suspected terrorist. Not just somebody we don't like or who writes something critical, you know, like the woman from March, the ACLU's complaint, but that's a pretty serious label to be attached. And so people don't know how they got on it. The best thing they can do is guess. And if they file, there's a procedure you can go through to, if that happens to you, you will get back a letter that doesn't confirm that you're on the list. And it doesn't say what, if anything's been done. The next time the person flies, they may not encounter those problems again, or they might. Or they might not have those problems today and then get back on the list tomorrow and then get back off it and back on it. Again, it's hard to imagine that does anything to enhance our security. But on the flip side, it has drastic consequences for the people on that list. This information is disseminated to state and local authorities. One person found out they were on the watch list when they tried to rent a car. So the car rental place had information about them, flagging them as a real or suspected terrorist. This is dangerous information to be spewing forth about people without anything that backs it up. If in fact someone is suspected of terrorist activity, that's an entirely different situation. But that's not what's happening here. From what we understand, the great majority of people on that list, whatever percentage of that million people is, have no criminal record, have no activity where they've not been accused of anything. So they shouldn't be on any list that isn't that invasive and has such serious consequences to American citizens who are on some sort of secret list.
Well, I guess there could be more people with some feelings that they think they might be on this list, or they have some questions. So if they want to follow up on that with your organization, how could they get in touch?
They can, there's a form to fill out. That's probably the easiest way, since it's impossible to reach me by phone, on our website, which is www.cairma.org. And then just fill out the form. Most people who are on the list will know it because they're seeing the signs of it all the time. They can't check in online. They can't check in, get their boarding pass at a kiosk. They have to check in at the gate. They have 4 S's on their boarding pass, which stands for Secondary Security Screening Selection. They go through the secondary searches, leaving the country. Upon returning to the country, they may go through lengthy and very invasive interrogations by customs. They usually know. They usually know.
Yeah. Now, of course, if people are in some way traumatized by a search or an encounter, what's it like for them if they're trying to find out where to get help?
Well, most of the folks. Our concern is that this has become normalized, something so egregious. This kind of behavior, targeting people because of their religious faith, has become normalized. When I go and speak to groups at mosques or other gatherings, we don't even ask people to raise hands anymore because, in the first place, it's not something you want to admit, oh yeah, I'm on that list of known or suspected terrorists. But when you speak to people one-on-one, they'll tell you, oh yeah, this has been happening to me and my children for years. And a lot of times the final straw is when their 10-year-old is pulled out of line, or they realize their 10-year-old is on that list. And that's when people come forth. But I think it is so common that it's not unusual for the Muslim community.
Thank you very much for being with us. Barbara Dougan from the Council on American-Islamic Relations. And we'll have more news in just a moment.